Hello, and welcome to this vSuite version 0.6 video tutorial. And in this video tutorial, I'm going to cover some of the basics of sunpath and shadow analysis. So, just going to turn this off for a moment because that's slightly ahead of where I want to be at the beginning of the video. So, I've got some simple urban geometry here from the centre of London. Just a simple plane underneath it. If you watched the last video, you should now be in a position where the vSuite has been installed. And you can tell because if I come to my little icon, it changes a Blender window into another Blender window. And we should see that we've got vSuite Nodes, Envy Network, and Envy Material in here. It's going to be vSuite Nodes that I'm going to work with exclusively here. So with vSuite Nodes selected, and I have created a node tree. Again, I showed that briefly in the previous video. I'll just say, while I think about it, that it's best if you only ever create one node tree in the vSuite Nodes window. And I think the vSuite will always look to the first one you created when it's trying to get data from the nodes. So just create one here is my recommendation. But I'm going to have that one selected. And now I should be able to add some nodes. Now a sunpath is dependent on, or a sunpath for a location is dependent on where that location is on the surface of the Earth. And a typical way of defining that is through latitude and longitude. So we're going to need a VI location node to specify that for us. So I'm going to come to Input Nodes, VI location, and I might just... And we'll see that in this VI location node, we've got a few options. The first one is a source menu. If I have manual selected here, then my latitude and longitude are entered manually into these two dialog boxes. And the details of what those numbers mean are in the user manual. If I switch over to EPW, or Energy Plus Weather option, this is where I get to pick files from the directory that I specified in the vSuite add-on preferences, which I showed in the previous video. And we can use this for sunpath analysis. We have to use a weather file if we're going to do certain kinds of lighting analysis, or if we're going to do a simulation with Energy Plus. But if we're just going to do a sunpath analysis where we only need latitude and longitude, we can just have manual, or we can ask the VI location node to extract latitude and longitude from this weather file, because that weather file will contain those two bits of data. So, but I'm just going to stick with manual for now. And whatever I had Birmingham selected before, so if I come back to manual, that's now the latitude and longitude of Birmingham in the UK, which is fine for the purposes of this video. So I've got a VI location node set up. Now I can add an analysis node, and the first one is sunpath. And the first thing it'll say to me is connect a location node. So connect a location node, and now I've got two options here. I've got an option for how many suns, or what kind of suns I'm going to create. And I've got a button for create sunpath. Now, before I do that, I just want to talk very briefly about different kind of shading methods in the viewport, because this is important when doing a sunpath analysis. So if I come over to this render properties tab, there's a little camera over here, and I come to the top, we can see that under the rendering engine option, we've got three. Eevee, which is like a advanced OpenGL, sort of a game engine, sort of rendering engine, shading engine. We've got Workbench, which is simple OpenGL. And we've got Cycles, which is the kind of full-on, physically based, potentially very accurate lighting and shading engine. And it's Cycles I'm going to select here. And what I do, some of what I do from now on is dependent on this cycles option being selected. I'm not saying you can't do some path analysis with, for example, Eevee, but I tend to use Cycles, and that's the one I know. So once I have Cycles picked here, we also have up here these 4 circles, and they define how the viewport is going to be shaded in reference to this option. So wireframe is probably the same for whichever one of these I pick. Solid, this is a simple OpenGL preview, and this is probably also the same whichever ones of these I pick. But if I come up to material preview, then we start to see some differences. And if I come up to rendered preview, this is where we have kind of a full-on rendering of the scene. Then I have got sort of big differences between these rendering engines. So Cycles is full-on shaded, and Eevee is going to be more simple, more of a preview. So these kind of go up in detail and fidelity from left to right. Now, the ones we're going to generally work in is the solid preview mode and the rendered preview mode. And it's important that we have Cycles selected for this last one. So that's just a note about the different shading methodologies we have. So I have my scene, I've got my nodes. So I'm going to create a single sun path. So I create that. So what happens is we create a sun path, and within this sidebar, this 3D viewport sidebar, which we can toggle with the N key, in this vSuite tab here, I should now see, I might need to click on this little triangle next to it. I should now see this VI display section. And this VI display section is created for all sorts of different kinds of lighting analysis, and it controls the options for the visualization. And in this case, controls the options for the sun path. Now, the sun path itself is to some extent just a regular Blender object. The base, the circular base, is a regular Blender object. In version 0.4, the whole thing was a Blender object. But in version 0.6, is just the base, and the sun path itself is actually an OpenGL shader written on top. And there are some implications to that change that I'll talk about later on. But as the base is a Blender object, this can be scaled and moved just like any other Blender object. I can sort of position that around my sun path. Now, what I can do, if I'm in this solid preview mode, what I can do is, if I come to this little down triangle here, I can come down here and I can enable shadow. Now, this then gives a kind of real-time shadowing based on the sun position. If I just expand that window a little bit so we can see what's going on. So we can now see the effect of that sun position. On shadowing on the scene, which could be quite useful for getting a real-time idea about how much shadow from one building falls on another, etc. But let me just go through some of these display options. Now, as well as all these different kind of ways of shading the viewport, plus our rendering engines, within this solid preview mode, we also have three options: Studio, Matcap, and Flat. Now, they will change the way the lighting kind of gets done within this scene. It all sounds all a bit complicated, I know, but you do get used to it. I tend to pick Flat for this. It just takes away any complexity on the lighting, and you're just left with the shadow and the non-shadow, the sunlit parts of the model. So I pick Flat here generally. Latitude, obviously that's going to be the latitude for our location. So we have we begin with 1 set by the VI location node, but we can obviously change that. Same with longitude, we can change that. Day of the year, as one might imagine. Time of the day, as one might imagine. Sun strength is important. If this is too low, you won't see any shadows. But the stronger you make the sun, the darker your shadows will be. Sun angle, that's not important in this mode. I will talk about that in a moment. Line width, this only works on Windows and Linux. But this allows us to change the thickness of our lines of our sun path. And then we've just got the coloration of the different elements of the sun path. And some options for our dash ratios and our dash densities. Sun size. See it a little bit more clearly from that perspective. So, sun color. And the color of the globe itself. And there's an alpha transparency associated with most of these colors as well. So we can also, for the sun in a particular place, we can display the time. So the 9th of April, 2 in the afternoon, you've got an altitude of 39.5 and an azimuth of 227.7. So just a simple way of giving you some metrics on the sun position. We've got some options here to change the font size for that and to change the color of the font, etc., and whether there's a font shadow. We can also select the drawing of the time values, morning till 5 in the morning, midday to 8 in the evening. So pretty self-explanatory, I think. So that's kind of what happens in this solid preview mode. Now because I've got the Cycles rendering engine selected, if I come to my rendered preview mode, I should now see that it takes longer for it to sort of become noise free because we're doing a sort of proper simulation now. But we should see the shadows again resulting from this sun and this sun position. Now, certain of these options do different things now. So sun strength, if we're oversaturating a little bit, so we're making what we really want is where it's sunny for the sort of viewport to be white, and we want it to be darker everywhere else. But sometimes if the sun strength is too high, we can get the shadows kind of being oversaturated. So sometimes we want to turn down the sun strength or make the sun strength whatever we need it to be to pick out our shadows. I'm also just going to turn off, because I'm more interested in just the light from the sun at the moment. I'm just going to make my world color black. It's better. So I can now change the sun strength to give me the right balance between light and shadow. Now sun angle does have an effect. So the more I increase sun angle, the blurrier the shadows get, and vice versa. And I think all the other options are the same. So this single sun path works in sort of OpenGL mode, solid mode, and rendered mode. The difference between them comes when I want to create multiple suns. So, and also, just while I think about it, it's about rotation as well. So as well as moving and scaling the sun path, I can rotate it. But if I'm in this OpenGL mode, if I rotate the sun path, my shadows don't change. I'll probably try and correct that in a future version of the V-Suite, but for the moment, the shadows will just remain pointing in the same direction, irrespective of any rotation and the change in the sun position because of that rotation of the sun path. If, however, I'm in rendered mode, because I'm rendering an actual lamp, and that blender lamp is positioned where the sun is, then if I now rotate this, the shadows do follow. So just bear that in mind. If you want to see the shadowing based on a rotated sun path, then you do have to come into this rendered mode here. But the other difference is if I want to create more than one sun. So if I have hourly selected here and I create sun path, I now create a sun for every hour for a particular day of the year, which is specified up here. And now that can be useful because we can now see the shadows cast by building over the course of a whole day. But it won't work in OpenGL mode, because in OpenGL mode, we've only got one directional real-time light source that we can use. To see the shadowing from all of these suns, we do have to come back into rendered preview mode again. And just while I think about it, this is quite important. Throughout the whole of the V-Suite, Y is north. So that's the default for everything. For Energy Plus, it doesn't really matter for FlowV and OpenFoam, but for Energy Plus, Radiance, all these kind of lighting studies, then Y is north. But now that I've come into this rendered preview, we can see all the suns. I'm getting a bit of oversaturation here. So I think my sun strength is probably a little bit too high because I've got more suns now. Because I'm going to bring that down so I can see my shadows a little bit better. But we should now see, I'll get all the shadowing from all these different suns. And if I was to rotate this, then again I'll see that shadowing correspond to the new position. Might just remove any rotation from that sun path. Now, to get this to work well, this kind of multiple sun shading, you may need to come into your render properties panel. And I think by default, display device is sRGB. And that can kind of, I think this is how things look by default, and it's a bit muddy and it's a bit difficult to make out the different shadows. So come to none. I think that's the only change that you need to make, or yeah, XYZ isn't bad, but I generally come to none. And I think that's the only change I generally need to make. But that will just make your shadows stand out a little bit better. If I was to pick a monthly sun, sometimes you get the odd sun hanging around from a previous version, and you may need to just change one of these options. But if I was to use this monthly sun, then for a particular hour of the day or a particular time of the day, for every month a sun is created. So if you're interested in the shadowing caused by a building at a particular time of the day, then this can sort of tell you over a whole year how much those shadows will project away. Like so. And I think that's more or less all I need to cover. Oh, there is one other thing. Let me just come back to a single sun. I'll come back to preview mode. And I'll pick a morning time. Now, you can use Blender's animation system to do animations of the sun movement. So I'm not going to go into the details of setting up Blender animations in these videos. There's plenty of resources online to do that. But I'm just going to very quickly set up a very quick animation. So it's quite quick and easy within Blender to set up little animations. And they can then be, well, the sun and the shadowing side can be rendered out. But as a quick, and this works in open GL preview mode, and it works in rendering mode as well. But you might need to turn down the frames per second of this playback so that you get sort of fully resolved shadows. at each step of the animation. But having this sun path as an OpenGL shader rather than as a Blender object has some advantages in in terms of real-time manipulation, but it does mean that if I was to render out this viewport, I can see the sun path and I can see the buildings, but I cannot see the actual sun path itself. I think there is a way around that I'm going to try and work out how that can be got around. But what that means is you can do screen grabs of your viewport, but you can't render out an image with the sun path in it at the moment. Hopefully in version 0.6.1, I'll have figured out some hacky way to get around that. So now I really do think that is everything I need to cover. Okay, thanks for watching.